Hello, everybody, and welcome to Season 2 of the Happy Cynics. And I'm Kevin Twain Lowry, otherwise known as Dr. K. And with me is the all-seeing eye dog, Isaac Dillman.
Howdy, howdy.
Hey, we took a couple weeks of break to refresh and renew and restore and all that sort of thing. And we hope you are enjoying your summer. We're going to, why not? I'll do the marketing ploy, the new and improved Happy Cynics, now with more happiness and more cynicism than ever before. So anyway.
Double stuffed.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's like how many types of Oreos can they make now? It's like, I'm waiting for the maple syrup flavors to come out, or whatever.
I'm pretty sure they've done that.
They probably have bacon and peanut butter or something.
I had one that was, I think it was Pop Rocks flavored Oreos that they came out with.
Oh, really?
And it was bizarre.
It's like a race between Oreos and Spam to see who can have more flavors. But
I eat both of those things. So
yeah, well, they're good snacks.
Some fried Spam on my eggs.
Yeah, that's popular in Hawaii. That's how they'll serve.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's like one of the biggest sellers there. They told us that on the tour. And we went into this little grocery store, and there was a whole end cap, like with a big pyramid of Spam cans. And there must have been like 12 different flavors.
How funny. I wonder why.
I don't know. It's just Hawaiian people just think it's the greatest thing. But yeah, and my parents went to Hawaii a few years after we did. And they said that they even McDonald's would serve your, if you wanted, they would put Spam on your scrambled eggs.
Wow.
So anyway, we thought we want to tackle a topic today that comes up, and that is you read some articles, so they call it the diploma divide.
Yeah, it's the difference between Democrats and Republicans on educational attainment.
Right. In other words, liberal conservative. Why do people with higher ed degrees tend to be more liberal? Why is it that the more education people get, say even with masters and doctorates, they tend to become more liberal? So why is that? Now, conservatives will want you to think it's all a bunch of brainwashing and, because after all, if you were thinking straight, you'd agree with us. They don't want to admit or acknowledge that maybe there's a reason why well-educated people don't agree with your viewpoints. So
yeah, well, and it's interesting that that's actually one of the dangers that was brought up in a lot of the papers that I read, was that if the higher educated educational institutions all become democratic, liberal leaning politically, that it erodes trust in the educational system amongst conservatives.
Oh, well, absolutely. Absolutely. So, that's been kind of the thing. It's like how do you have an informed electorate, voting voters? How do you have informed voters unless they're well educated? But most people who don't come from families that are well educated are not even going to be aware of how their thinking might be changed and transformed, or by getting an education. They're only going to go get the education if there's a vocational reason for it.
Yeah, well, and I think that vocational element of education is a common misunderstanding amongst more conservative, less educated people, of that, well, why would I go to college if it's going to put me in major debt, and it doesn't even serve my my career. Well,
Right.
that's because education isn't about being a little worker bee.
Yeah. And this is where I'm not going to get into this in this episode, but this is where I personally think that a high school diploma we've gone too far for high school is not enough education for the average citizen. All this needs to be raised now. The dropout age, as far as I know, in most states is still 16. That needs to be raised to at least 18. And everybody, you wouldn't be able to drop out until 18, or you could drop out after high school. But a college education, there should be a free public college education available for anyone who wants it. Just like we have public high schools. You go back 100 years, okay, before the Great Depression, and there were a lot of people that didn't have the luxury of going to high school. None of my grandparents did. And my grandmother really would have loved to, but for her to go to high school, she would have had to actually live with another family, because where her family was, there was no transportation provided to get to school. So, the closest high school for her would have been like 30 miles away. So she would have had to move and live with another family during the school year,
Wow.
And so she just
different times, huh?
Yeah, she decided to drop out after 8th grade. And I talked to her about that a couple times, but it should be provided because high school's not enough. And let's say this as well. The brain doesn't really reach its full development until the mid to late 20s. There's parts of a person's thinking that are still developing even after somebody gets a bachelor's degree, for example.
I can definitely confirm that.
Well, and I was just talking about this with my wife, because it's interesting so we were just watching the Olympics, and it's interesting. You can almost tell countries where the lifespan is shorter because the athletes look older. Like, in other words, for example, if somebody's life expectancy is 60 and the other person's life expectancy is 80, well, the 80-year-old, the person whose life expectancy is 80 is only going to age at 3/4 the rate as the other person. The other person's going to age 4/3 the rate of the person with the longer lifespan.
Interesting.
And
I'm sure that's not true across all health aspects. But.
No, but I mean, how many people historically have like even in the 20th century, you go back and look at your parents' pictures in their high school yearbook or your grandparents or whatever.
They look old.
And they look old. I mean, they look like somebody would, like they were 26, 27 years old, like in your generation, see? And I think that's just why, like, even a lot of 70-year-olds still look pretty good today.
It would be interesting to do like a formal study on that to see if like that perception is just like, oh, well, styles have changed, or if it's more like concrete than that.
Well, I think it's more concrete than that. So like, for example, like you watch like All in the Family in the early 70s. And I think Carol O'Connor at the time was in his late 40s, early 50s, where I still don't think that I look quite as old as he did in that show, and I'm 59 now.
Well, but on the other hand, Tim Walz and Kamala Harris are the exact same age.
No kidding. No,
and she looks a lot younger than him.
She does. I thought he was a lot older.
Yeah, no, they're
she's
like
50. She's
3
59.
months apart from each other.
Really? So they're both my age.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, there you go.
I was actually reminded when Biden dropped out that you mentioned when we were talking about the generational differences.
Yes.
That your generation hasn't had their shot yet. Well, here you go.
Yeah, that's right. We'll see what we can do now. But with education, all right, people are living longer. There's like the development is slower, and just the further we go, the more you have to organize. Like, we don't have like pension plans and everything just laid out for you. You now have to even choose like what kind of options you want for health insurance. You don't just get a package thing handed to you. Mm-hmm. The closest thing we have that's like fast food, where you say, I want a number one. But even now, that's even starting to break down because not everybody wants the same thing. So when you get to coupons, there's like, okay, buy one sandwich, you get another one for $1, or, or two for this, or you get the $5 special where you get a small sandwich and chicken nuggets and fries and a drink or whatever. So like they're changing it, like people want more options over time. And that just makes life more complicated. And again, we need a more educated electorate. But let's talk about specifically what kind of education is needed. What is it that changes a person? Go ahead.
I'm not quite connecting the dots between we need more options over time and we need more free education, more free public education.
What I'm saying is that human tendency, like life, is becoming increasingly complex.
Oh, I see.
Because over time, our push is to have more options. Well, the more options we have, the more decisions we have to make, and the more complicated everything gets. And so you don't just kind of like step out of high school, go to the local factory, sign up. They give you your health care plan. They give you your pension plan. They may even give you a term life policy. Like everything was just kind of packaged for you. You just belong to the union, pay your dues, show up for the meetings, and that was pretty much it. Now you've got to pay attention to more of this stuff. And if we don't, let's put it this way, since we have politicians that have become slicker and slicker at packaging themselves, it takes people with a little more savvy to be able to tell the difference between politicians that will actually try to do what they say versus ones that will just say anything to get elected. And life is becoming increasingly complex. And because life is becoming increasingly complex with more and more choices and options and dynamics, because we're interacting more and more outside of our box, outside of our local communities, even outside of our nations, okay, with other nations, now there's a lot more going on. I mean, how much does the average person know about world events to know who's going to be good for the security of the country as far as running for president? So between Biden and Trump, how much does the average person really know as to whose way of handling somebody like Putin is going to be the wisest? And so anyway, that's kind of where I was going with that, and why we need more education than we did in the past, because life is more complicated today than it was in the past.
Yeah, well, and I think the alternative to increasing educational standards across our nation, across the globe, really, is a sort of like Platonic version of philosopher kingship. Well, that would be the good ending, I suppose, in an uneducated society.
Well, that, in my opinion, that would be the utopian ideal, but in reality, it ends up being the rich.
Right. Yeah, it's an elite class of
Right. And that is historically oligarchs. How things will go. And truthfully, the fact that there is such a huge gap in wealth in this country is not really, I mean, people can point the finger at the billionaires and say it was their fault, but you know what? It's the average consumer's fault for not knowing how to spend their money wisely and how to negotiate labor contracts wisely and things like that. And so, if if democracy is actually going to work, then people need to have an informed opinion. I mean, who wants to belong to any kind of a club where people vote and they have no idea of even what they're voting on or what's even needed? Nobody wants to belong to a club where somebody says, "Oh, hey, I like how so-and-so talks or looks, so let's make him or her president." Like nobody wants to belong to a club like that. You want to pick somebody that's going to do a good job, right? But how many people really know enough? And here's the thing: people think they know, but the problem is that people who are undereducated, I'll say it that way, people who are undereducated are not aware of what they don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm sort of reminded in this discussion of Durkheim's anomie, his description of anomie. Society becomes so specialized, so siloed off, so isolated that the social system just like breaks down and everyone's expectations become unclear.
Mm-hmm.
And I had never really connected that idea with the way American culture has gone, but I'm starting to think that might be more relevant to this conversation.
It may very well be.
And I think, you'd think like, oh, everybody becoming more specialized. That's a problem that education has caused, right? Because jobs require you to be more specialized. But I actually think a liberal arts education is sort of like a great unifier, right? Because you're specifically striving for a broad base of knowledge.
Yes. So I could push a little. Well, I will. We still haven't gotten into like content-wise. What is it that a person learns in college, or what is say a good liberal arts? What does a liberal arts education inform somebody as to that really challenges their worldview? And we could go with that and move that direction. At some point, well, I'll just make this other little point here. What I was going to say is, here's the thing, and we talked about this before, the Electoral College. See, and I've been thinking about this. The Electoral College should be replaced with a popular vote, but here's another part of it. If people don't want to be informed and educated, then they shouldn't be voting. And that's my own personal feeling. If I could suggest a law to be passed or an amendment to the Constitution, it would be that anybody who had, like the right to vote would be something that you have. It's a privilege to vote. Instead of a right to vote, you have the privilege to vote by passing a citizenship test on the government and how it works. I was talking my nephew, and I was telling him about. I suggested he go back on YouTube and watch clips of what was called Jay Leno's. He called it jaywalking, and he would go out on the streets in Los Angeles, and then ask people questions about basic United States government or who government officials are, or even like history or geography or something like that. And it's just mind blowing at how many people don't really know a whole lot. And my nephew was just like blown away because he's really into politics and everything. And he was just flabbergasted that there were people that couldn't even name the 3 branches of government. And these are people that are voting. There's too much at stake anymore. It used to be, I think, that if you tended to make a bad vote, it wasn't terrible because at least people in all the different parties, there was a sense of decency and being honorable. That's what I think has now changed. This whole Trump movement, in my opinion, is a game changer. Not in the sense of Donald Trump, but he has brought out the worst in a certain segment of our population of people that, like the stuff that Trump has gotten away with, candidates would have never gotten away with 30 years ago, and even less before then. Like there were, I'd be lying if say like every, it wasn't like every U.S. president, before Richard Nixon was like a Sunday school teacher, but they at least, there was a sense of at least dignity and integrity and doing what was best for the country. And instead of just a bunch of like childish name calling and hate mongering. And it's like, here's the point.
Well, the only way you fight, I mean, the Andrew Jackson era was pretty rambunctious too.
It was.
Andrew Jackson to the Civil War got pretty rowdy.
It did. Well, it did. And you could see how things escalated from that. And the point is that if the populace doesn't take education seriously, then we're just going to be victims to the most silver-tongued orators.
Well, so I want to go back to your recommendation that there be some sort of like test to vote.
Yeah, if you get a bachelor's degree at an accredited institution, then that would exempt you. You would be able to get either that or pass the citizenship test.
Well, I mean, I have questions about like, I think, does that not create more problems than it maybe solves in terms of the unequal distribution of power?
Well, I guess the question is, should people who do not want to be informed, should they have power?
Well, and see, from my perspective, I think there are critiques of this from like the status quo perspective. But my perspective is that what you're getting at is a problem with representative democracies inherently.
Yes, it is.
And not necessarily something that can be solved if you want to maintain representative democracy. Right? Because the way I see it, and maybe this is too radical, but the way I see it, the way that Congress works, we'll just take Congress. Congress gets to participate in democracy because they actually vote on ideas and bills and laws that affect the nation. We as citizens don't get to participate in democracy because we don't get to vote on those things.
No, that's right.
We only get to vote on people to go participate in democracy for us.
Right.
And I think because of that system, you tend to get less than ideal results out of democracy for the general population because you're concentrating democracy, the powers of democracy, in the hands of a few people. And generally, they're not the people that are like the greatest examples of the people they represent.
It's already that way.
Oh, well, I know. And I think especially things like Citizens United, which introduces money into it, allows democracy to be bought and sold.
But here's my point. Those kind of injustices are not going to be corrected as long as we allow uninformed, undereducated people to continue to vote because they're the ones that are easily duped.
But I'm saying it goes further than that. It's uninformed, uneducated people are in Congress. Those are the people that actually vote.
Yeah, but if the bar was raised on who can vote, I think the bar would be raised on who gets elected too.
Well, yeah, but at that point, I would ask the question of why not just go to democracy for all? Why not just have a division of responsibility in society that if an issue is, let's say an issue is specific to your locality or affects you directly in some way, you get a vote on that issue. And then on the rare occasion that an issue is at the national level, then maybe we go to like a representative democracy system. But we already do this for stuff like referendums and, you know.
Right. We have that option.
Yeah, but we don't exercise it. And then we make, you know, we make the dumbest, most minute things, and we put the dumbest people in charge of them.
And why is that? Because we have some of the dumbest people voting.
I'm sorry. It's a system that's just ripe for that, though.
What's that?
I think it's the whole system is just ripe for that the system itself incentivizes that behavior, and that the system's got to be fixed. That there's too much power in the hands of the dumbest people, but those dumbest people aren't the people that are like, you're not going to fix without severely dividing the nation into two distinct classes of educated and uneducated.
Do we not already have that?
Well, we do, but I don't think making it a formal division is going to help.
Well, okay, that may be true. But my thinking was this. All right, we already have a voting age, right? I mean,
sure,
we have to draw the line somewhere. Now, we say you don't have to have any education. So do we let, I'm not sure, do we let illiterate people vote?
We do currently.
Well, see, and that's another thing. Now, we say, okay, well, if you're a felon, you can't vote. I mean, do we let people that are developmentally delayed or challenged vote? I don't know. Do people with Down syndrome vote?
I think they do.
Maybe they do. I'm not really sure.
But I happen to know, like, there are Down syndrome people who are intelligent.
Well, yeah.
And are disabled in other ways.
But there's a way to assess that. Like, I mean, if we're not going to have any kind of bars, well, then why don't we just let 8 and 10-year-old kids vote too? I mean, all I'm saying is, let's put it this way. I think it ought to be a bar that the overwhelming majority of people could easily clear. I really don't think it's that difficult to learn that there are 3 branches to our government and what each one does, for example. I'm not saying have a difficult test so you only have a handful of people can vote. I wouldn't.
But you do, in order for it to have an effect, you do have to exclude people through this test.
Well, you do.
And I think that the better solution is to make people responsible for their own politics, right? So right now we can defer our responsibility to a politician, which is why people feel like they can be irresponsible and uninformed.
Okay, so what other way are you going to make these people be responsible?
Make it direct democracy. Force them to participate. And not when it doesn't matter to them, when it's like, oh, well, you know, people living in Nashville aren't going to be making decisions for people who live in Chicago on this one issue, right? But like when it's something that actually directly affects you, I think you're more incentivized to go and be educated about it.
Well, I do, but you can't force people to vote.
Right, and they probably won't vote if they don't care about the issue.
Well, and they probably won't.
But they're more likely. I think you're more likely to get an accurate representation of the actual will of the people in government through direct democracy rather than representative democracy.
Well, yeah, of course, but and maybe my idea is not a good one. I'm not convinced that it's a bad one yet, but I mean, I understand what you're saying, but in my opinion, okay, let me get a little more philosophical here for just a second. To me, there's a difference in what would be individual rights versus civic rights. So, like my right to privacy, own property, free speech, freedom of religion, all these things those are personal rights, and I don't have to do anything for those. Now, should voting be a right or a privilege? That's what I'm really bringing up. Driving is not a right. You have to get a license to be able to drive on the roads. Now, if you want to get in a car and drive on your property, you're free to do that, as far as I know, as long as you're not going off your property. If you want to put your 5-year-old on your riding lawnmower, unless you're clearly putting him in danger, okay? Nobody is going to be able to arrest you if you have your child help him mow the grass or whatever. But what you do off your property out in public, that's a little different. Now, I'm just asking the question philosophically whether voting should just be an inherent, because I'm alive, I live here, and I'm over a certain age, that entitles me to vote. I was more inclined, let's put it this way. If I were convinced that most people were doing a good job handling the internet and social media, then I would feel much differently about this. But all of this has really destroyed a lot of my confidence in the average person.
Well, I certainly don't disagree with you there.
Well, and it's not just a matter of intelligence, but you hit the nail on the head. Most people are only thinking about themselves. They're not thinking about what is going to be best for society at large. And then how does that? They want the whole country to be a reflection of their personal life and standards and preferences. And that is just not going to work. And people who are too stupid to see that, in my opinion, shouldn't be voting. Okay, I don't know how you sift them out, though. I really don't, except to do something like I suggested.
Here's my philosophical rebuttal, because I agree with you on your premise. Okay. And I think the founding fathers agree with you, right? That's why they restricted voting.
Yes.
But the founding fathers also, I think they conceived of government as more of an economic regulator. And therefore, if you didn't have stake in the economic game, you didn't deserve to have a vote. And they're also living at a time technologically where representative democracy was your only option. Now, here's my problem with the idea of having certain uneducated unable to pass a certain test people unable to vote. Because my concern is that it rests on this idea that the way the government sort of works right now is a bit as a scapegoat, right? Because, like, let's say you voted for Trump, you can still disavow what Trump does because, I didn't know he was going to do that.
Right.
The members of government sort of act as a national get out of jail free card for our own conscience, like our own ethics. That, we're not responsible for what the government does, even though we voted for them. Because, I didn't know he would do that, or I didn't know, that's them doing that. They're the ones that are bearing the guilt of that rather than the populace. And because everyone gets a vote after a certain age, that functions pretty well. That, it's not my neighbor's fault that I can't afford my mortgage. It's the government's fault that the government gets to be the scapegoat, because no one individual American citizen is responsible for that. But if you have a class of people who don't get to participate, then they are liable to blame their own woes on everyone else who does get to participate. And I think that's what you see in, like, the abolition movement, with things like, John Brown's movement, and a lot of those, like, early American, micro revolutions. I think that's what they're kind of responding to is, it's all of your fault that I have hardships in my life because I don't get to participate in government the same way you do.
All right. I
I think that whole system is messed up, but
well, I see your point. I think really let's put it this way. Perhaps I might still have faith that the majority would make the right decision if we basically had just a popular vote, first of all. And then second of all, we need to go back to laws and regulations that cut out all of the like some of the stuff that comes from Fox News and Newsmax. It's just like blatant lies. And some of this even came out in court, and that still doesn't change anything. Let's put it this way. Some people are going to have difficulty making a good decision, even with accurate information, let alone to be able to tell when somebody is just yanking their chain and trying to mislead them and make.
Well, I think what you're talking about is actually what's at the heart of the diploma divide.
That's exactly
right. Educated people are better equipped to see through bullshit than non-educated people.
Well, and that's why I think that you need to have a certain educational attainment to be able to vote. If you did that, you wouldn't even have to make it age. If you had some really gifted kid that, graduated from Oxford at age 16, and they could vote, or whatever,
Yeah, well, and that I think that would be addressed by the system I'm proposing. Let's say you would accomplish this by say a state decides it's going to send its 2 senators, but they're going to pass state legislation that says those 2 senators must vote according to these what are they called when they're on the ballot, and it's just like it's an issue. It's it's a piece of legislation, but it's on everybody's ballots in an election, a referendum. Yeah.
I was going to say pork barrel.
No, but let's say, Nebraska or whatever sends senators to Congress. But if those senators don't vote the same way that a referendum in Nebraska would, will them to vote, they get replaced. That would be a regulation. Just like, if you have the Electoral College, right? If the Electoral College doesn't follow the popular vote in the state that they're supposed to be representing, that's not legal for them to do. The electors from Illinois can't cast a vote against the will of the Illinois electorate.
Yeah, I'm not sure what law changed to where the electors have to vote according to the popular vote in the state.
It's on the state level.
Well, then so
there's no national law for that.
No, do
I don't see why we can't do that to Congress too.
Do all 50 states have laws like that?
I don't know.
They can't. I would almost be sure, and that's how Trump was trying to overthrow the last election.
Yeah. So let's do a little live research. Why do electors? In 1952, the Supreme Court ruled that state parties can require electors to pledge to vote for their party's nominee before they are certified as electors.
All right.
So it's actually a party thing.
Okay, here. There is no federal law that requires electors to vote as they have pledged, but 29 states and the District of Columbia have legal control over how their electors vote in the Electoral College. And here are the 29 in Washington, D.C. Alabama, Alaska, California, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, D.C., Florida, Hawaii, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, Mississippi, Montana, Nebraska, Nevada, New Mexico, North Carolina, Ohio, Oklahoma, Oregon, South Carolina, Tennessee, Utah, Vermont, Virginia, Washington, Wisconsin, and Wyoming. So that means that there are 21 states that don't have any requirements or legal control over their electors. That is disconcerting.
Yeah, I found a source from 2020 that has that number at 32 states in Washington, D.C. now.
Really?
Yeah. So I wonder if something
maybe this
changed.
is old. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, this looks like it's a little older. This looks like it's 2009. Wow.
So now we're up to 32 in 2020. What are we at now? I bet you it's more now between 2020 and 2024.
Yeah. So yeah, I see this too here. So anyway, wow. Okay. Electors vote is expected about 99% of the time. Over the last century, just 19 electors bucked the system to vote their conscience. Remarkably, 10 did so or attempted to do so in 2016.
Oh, that's why it would have changed after 2016.
Yep. Faithless electors have never changed the outcome of an election, though in 1836 they threw the vice presidential election of Richard Johnson to a contingent election in the Senate after Virginia's electors refused to vote for him due to his relationship with Julia Chinn, an enslaved person. Interesting. So anyway.
Very interesting. Well, I'm with you on getting rid of the Electoral College.
Yeah, either that or have the Electoral College the way it was originally supposed to be. And that is, the people aren't actually voting for a president. They just vote for the people that they want to elect the president.
Yeah. Well, so I was talking to my brother and my dad over the weekend about this exact issue. And we came to the conclusion that having a president is kind of stupid.
Oh. So
that the executive branch should be more of a committee.
I was hoping you weren't going to say we need a king.
Well, benevolent monarchy is the most efficient form of government.
Is it?
According to some. That's
it probably is efficient, but until you get a bad one.
Right. Yeah, that's why they call it benevolent monarchy.
Well, yeah.
They don't say that the benevolence of the monarch is contingent on who you are.
Well, that's the thing. You don't have any control over the benevolence. That's the problem.
No, but I think that why do we have so much power concentrated into an individual? That's a very fascinating aspect of our weird democracy.
Yeah. I don't know. It's actually, well, I think this. I think the partisanship that exists in this country has resulted in giving the president more power. Because the way the Constitution is, if Congress agrees on something, they can easily override a presidential veto. But how likely is it now, like almost every issue, except like right after 9/11 or something like that, it's got to be like a national emergency. Otherwise, every issue is either a Republican or Democrat issue. We no longer have people that vote American. They just vote party lines. So that's the problem. I don't know that having more parties would change it. But anyway, that's probably some of it. Maybe we need additional checks and balances. So, but that's the issue. There's not enough cooperation in either house of Congress to override the president. So the president has all this power now because these parties, like the only things that ever get enacted is when you have a slim majority that votes for it and the president signs it.
Yeah. Did you ever watch Parks and Recreation?
Yes.
Do you remember Ron Swanson's quote about the ideal government? My idea of a perfect government is one guy who sits in a small room at a desk, and the only thing he's allowed to decide is who to nuke.
Oh.
Maybe we should, as a nation, think about dividing the executive branch into the diplomatic foreign policy branch, which could probably be one person, and a domestic cabinet that's actually, elected. Yeah.
Well, yes. Maybe we should have instead of I don't know. Of course, just about every I don't know. Power's never balanced well, like historically. So when somebody like tries like a triumvirate or something like that, it always falls apart. Like you could have one person in charge of domestic issues, one person in charge of foreign issues or something, and even divide up the domestic if you wanted to and have a committee. But there's going to end up being a chair of the committee who's going to end up having more sway than the others, and eventually it gets swung around to pretty much what we have.
Is it not already that we have all these committees, but it's really their billionaire donors who make any of the decisions anyway?
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah. That's a lot of it, and that's the part of it. Like there need to be laws changed. The laws aren't going to be changed because this country's been led by rich people ever since it was founded. So I don't think that's going to change. I think that's probably the case in most countries. I dare say that's the one part that Marx got right. Now his solution, sounds good on paper, but that doesn't work either. So I think there is no real solution. I think there's always an ongoing battle for the rights of the individual person.
You definitely want to avoid any final solutions.
Well, yes, that's true. Like too final. Yeah. The final solution, just kill everybody. Right. But no, it's, let's put it this way. We always say, freedom is not free. You got to fight for it. Yes, we do. But most of the time, our freedom is not really being threatened by foreign powers. Our freedoms are being threatened from within our own country by people who want to dominate and basically what's the word I'm looking for?
Dictate every aspect of your life.
Exploit people financially. That's what a lot of it is. And again, like whether talking about news outlets or businesses or whatever, it's all about money. If you change the laws and there weren't any money in it, then the behavior would stop. But how are you going to change those laws when everything was started allowing the money flow and all that to begin with? And so I think Marx is right. It would take an overthrow, but in the end, you would just end up with a different set of power players. And that's what happened in the communist countries. So anyway.
And I think that goes back to what I was saying about like the government is sort of a guilt deferred scenario. And I think the breakdown of that is what Marx fails to consider, and what all the communist countries failed to consider, is that society needs somebody to say they're responsible for everything that's wrong. That's essentially what the government functions as for normal people.
Yeah. Yeah. The scapegoat. It's not, and that is interesting because every election cycle, you can see that if things are going well for people, well, that's what we did. It wasn't the government.
Right.
We got to get the government out of the way.
For some reason, it's never, Biden or Trump is responsible for the low gas prices.
Right. Yeah. Something goes bad though. Oh, it's the president's fault. It's Congress's fault. And there are legitimate criticisms of these folks, but a lot of people just, it's the same thing. Everybody wants to take credit for the victories and then point the finger in the losses.
Yeah. Well, and it's always funny when people like either want to take credit, like, oh, this is the best economy we've had in 30 years, or this is the worst inflation we've had for 30 years. And I hear this, and I grew up hearing this, like the president doesn't actually affect any of that. Like the amount of control that any one president exerts over our nation's economy is minuscule.
Yeah. The only thing I do think, I would say this, I think that the stimulus money that the government under Biden sent out right away.
That was Trump.
What's that?
That was Trump, the $1,600 for COVID.
Oh, Trump.
That was Trump that did that.
But they did some under Biden too, I'm pretty sure.
It wasn't quite as universal though.
So some of that drove prices up a little bit, but it was necessary because if there were so many people that missed a lot of work and a lot of income, that if they didn't have that money, we could have kept prices down. And then there was a whole segment of the population that wasn't going to be able to buy toilet paper and canned goods or whatever else they need to get by on until things got back to normal. And so some of that was necessary. And then people don't even pay attention to the fact that prices were going up all over the world because of COVID.
Right. Yeah. It had nothing. It had very little to do with our domestic policy.